Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to see you all. I know you're anxiously awaiting John and Hae-kyung to get here so you can all meet him. They will be here in the next couple weeks. He is healthy and Mom is doing well, so thank you all for your prayers and support. I guess we've been here for about 3 months now, a little over, and we are just so thankful that you guys have invited us into this church. I have not been able to build relationships with all of you as quickly as I would have liked at this point due to my wife being pregnant and the baby coming during those 3 months. But we are hopeful that as life hopefully settles down, we will find time to interact with each of you and spend more time with you all. That being said, if you are able to reach out to me during the week and have questions for me or just want to chat, even though we're down in Queens a lot of the time, we are still accessible by phone or email. We even built a website. Should have made a slide for this, but www.midhudsonumc.org. I want you all to go there, give me feedback, give me input, information to put on the website, because without your information, the website kind of just sits there. So we need to know what events are happening, what ideas you have for the future of the church, and things like that. So that's my brief introduction. I'm so excited to see the kids here. When I was a child, I was sitting just where you were at a small church in southern Georgia. Never in a million years did I imagine I would have traveled to over 45 countries and been a lawyer in New York City and had a Korean wife and Korean children. Never in a million years would I have ever anticipated any of those things to happen. So he is right. If you pursue God and you pursue all of the ambitions and dreams that you have, you will achieve many, many things in this world. And I'm sure many of you in here can relate to that as God has blessed you over the years. Let's begin this week talking about the book of Jeremiah. I speak from the lectionary, which is, as I've told you before, basically I don't get to choose the scriptures for the week. The global church has already decided that these are the scriptures that they feel God has called the church to preach on. Sometimes that's good when you get a nice, easy story, and sometimes it can be more difficult when you have a text like Jeremiah. So I'm going to try, even though it was so eloquently read for us this morning, I'm going to try to unpack it for you and help it make sense. In order to understand Jeremiah, I will give you a brief recap of the events in the Old Testament. Many years before Jeremiah, if you know, as you may recall, Moses helped deliver the Hebrews and the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. The Hebrews then wandered the desert for 40 years, journeying in the wilderness until Joshua led them into the land of Canaan, which is modern-day Israel and Palestine and Jordan and that surrounding area. That was the land that God had promised to those people after they came out of Egypt. Well, later, the people continued to grow. That land was divided into 12 tribes, one for each of the sons of Jacob. The tribes were ruled over by judges. You may know some of the names, like Samson, from Samson and Delilah story. They ruled over those lands for centuries until all of Israel was united under King Saul and then ruled over by King David and then King Solomon. And one thing that Solomon did that's very important is build the temple, which is where the people of Israel believed God to kind of live. And that was where the priests would go and interact with God. Israel was later split into 2 kingdoms, Israel and Judah, and it lasted that way for about 200 years until the Assyrians came and conquered them, and then the Babylonians. All right, so there's your Bible history for the morning. Jeremiah takes place in the 600s BC, during the time when Babylon is basically taking over the land that they thought was their promised land. Nebuchadnezzar comes in. If you've watched VeggieTales, he's the guy that sings about the bunny, the chocolate bunny. He comes in and he destroys the temple. That's very meaningful to the Hebrews because that was their house for God. Well, God, the book of Jeremiah is written and it's used by the Jewish people, even today, to help them understand why their temple was destroyed. And God basically says in the book of Jeremiah that he used the Babylonians to destroy their temple because they were wicked. All right? So it gives the Jewish people an explanation, a spiritual explanation for the political events that were happening at that time. Now, following that, God doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that he is also changing his relationship with the Israelites. If you remember from the text, this is some of the verses I'll summarize for you. In verse 28, God told the people that he used to watch over the houses of Israel and Judah, and that the actions of the previous generations would affect the future generations. He says that if the father eats sour grapes, well then the children taste the sourness in their mouth. And that's how God was relating to the Israelite people. They were basically connected to God from the Hebrew people that had come out of Egypt, from the tribes, from the judges, from the kings, etc. Well, now God's saying, I'm changing this relationship with people. I'm changing this relationship with the new generation of Israelites. Now, those who eat sour grapes, they're going to taste the sourness. And then God goes on to say, people will not need to teach each other to know the Lord, for everyone will know God. God changes in this text how he relates to his people. Okay? Now, what does this passage in Jeremiah mean for us today as we celebrate the 43-year history of Mid-Hudson Korean United Methodist Church? Here we go. First, for those of you who are elders in the church, do not be fearful about the future of this church and of the overall church. In many Christian circles, people are very fearful of what they see as an increasingly secular and narcissistic culture. Young people, and in fact most people, have very little interest coming to church. Our society idolizes work and productivity, so much so that it's very difficult to think about taking a day of rest. The idea that sexual practice should be only between a man and a woman within the confines of marriage is a largely ridiculed idea, is outdated or backwards. At the same time, those who ridicule and shame homosexuals or people who've had divorces or women who've had abortions or any others that you disagree with only increase pain and division in the church when ridicule happens on those issues. Celebrities who represent opulence and wealth are glorified. Being ignorant is completely acceptable and even applauded sometimes. Fear is rampant by the media, on the street, in the airports, even in schools. People, we divide ourselves up by social classes, by race, by other barriers, in order to ignore very difficult, real things that are happening in the world, like over-criminalization of poor people, growing gaps in wages between people, lack of proper nutrition and proper education for lower-class children, how our lifestyle is destroying our planet. The world can look pretty grim, right? So, Pastor, you ask, how can we not be fearful about the future of the church? The church is dying. Our children don't want to go to this awesome church that we've worked so hard to build. Society is becoming liberal, secular, narcissistic, more and more and more godless. Maybe the church is doomed. Maybe we're just rearranging chairs on the Titanic until the whole thing finally sinks. Maybe. But maybe society's changing. Maybe it's becoming more godless. Or maybe it's kind of like it's always been. Opulence, sex issues, racism, violence, classism, over-busyness, ignorance, poverty. These are not brand new problems. History is littered with these issues. They have faced religious people since the beginning of time. And how do we know that? Because they're all talked about in the Bible. They're not new issues. However, in reality, the church in the United States is declining in membership and attendance. But I say do not fear. God shows us in Jeremiah that God can and does change how God relates to his people. Maybe young people don't want to come to our churches because the way we do church isn't relevant to them anymore. Perhaps God's purposes for their generation and how God desires to connect with future generations isn't through churches the way that we think about churches. Perhaps today's churches will eventually be replaced with something else. Or maybe the church membership and attendance will skyrocket and things will begin to increase and the church will grow in Mid-Hudson and in the United States. I don't know. It doesn't matter whether I know or whether you know or whether anyone on this earth knows what's going to happen in our churches, because God knows. And God's plan for God's people has never changed. God's purposes for God's people change. How God interacts with us changes. He changed his covenant with his people in Jeremiah, but even before that, he changed it in the Garden of Eden. He changed it after he flooded the earth with Noah. He changed it when Jesus came. And he's changed it again and again and again throughout history. How God interacts with us changes from generation to generation. But rest assured that God's plan for this earth and this universe and all who are in it remains the same as it did before creation. Israel's wickedness didn't take God by surprise in Jeremiah. He didn't have to go change his plans. God's plan had been laid out since before time. His plan for the Hebrews, for Jesus, for the early church, for the modern church, for us, for generations to come. It's all been laid out. God wasn't surprised when Adam and Eve ate the apple. He wasn't surprised when the Hebrews were wicked in Jeremiah. And he definitely wasn't surprised when the Jews and the Romans killed Jesus. In fact, the whole reason Jesus came was to die. That was always part of the plan. Eden, Jeremiah, the resurrection, each event changed how God relates to God's people and ultimately how God relates to us today. But God's plan has always remained the same. And we are so blessed that we get to be a part of it for 43 years, 100 years, however many years we get to be here. Do not fear. God may change how each generation understands and relates to God, but God's plan never changes. So what does that mean for the church and for our role in society? Do we just accept every new idea that comes along? Oh, God must have changed it, so we'll just accept it. Do we sit and do nothing because God's plan's already happening, so why would I bother doing anything? It's going to happen either way. No, we're the church. We are the living part of God's plan today. God says in Jeremiah that all will know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them. The church is God's tool today to let all people know God. At this point in history, it's our purpose to act out God's plan for God's people. So church, let's be God's tool so that all may know God. All in this community, all in the Hudson River, all in your families, all in our workplaces, in our schools, wherever your sphere of influence is, be the tool of God so that all may know God. So we shouldn't approach this task with fear for our children's future, fear for the future of the church. We should approach the task with confidence. Why? Because God's plan will happen. And as God's tools, we also must be smart. We must be strategic. We must listen to how God is speaking to our children. We must listen to how God is speaking to people in the community. God has a purpose for us, for our young people, and for the people in this community. Can we reach out and listen to them? Can we be the tool that God uses? to enact his plan in our lives. You guys are an awesome congregation. I have been very, very impressed by the many of you who come pray every morning at 6 a.m., the volunteers who cook every week. There are so many in the church that do way more than they should, and there are others who could probably do a little more, but overall the church is great. I've been so blessed to be a part of it, and honestly feel guilty sometimes when I can't contribute more, as life has been so crazy for us recently. But you guys did hire me for a reason. You, I assume, want to reach out to new audiences. That's what I've heard from people in the church. I'm not sure that's what everyone wants to do. I'm sure many people enjoy having everything done in Korean, and that feels comfortable to you, and that's totally acceptable, and that's totally fine. But I'm getting the sense from the people in the church that you do want to create a multicultural, a multilingual type congregation. So if that is truly your desire, then we all have to do that together. There's no way I can do that by myself. So I've created a mission, purpose, proposal for the church. I believe it might be, I'm always welcome for feedback, to grow closer to God by increasing cultural diversity in the church. The more we learn about other people, the more different types of people we have, the more we learn about God. That was the mission I proposed. The way we carry that mission out is by having a single vision for the church. Instead of this group doing A, and this group doing B, and this group doing C, and this family going here, and this family going here, we all need to be on the same page. If a program that someone wants to do doesn't fit with that vision, you scrap it. If an idea someone has doesn't fit in that vision, you change it. You do something else. You get a singular focus, and we can carry out the mission that you guys want. I propose, this is just a proposal, that our vision might be to secure the future of the church by increasing ministry to young adults and families in both English and Korean languages. If you agree with that mission and that vision and you want to see Mid-Hudson grow in this way, great. It's going to take the work of all of us. If you have input and you want to change any part of the mission or the vision, then that is totally welcome. God speaks to all of us in different ways. But the point is, it needs to be an effort of everyone in the church, not just the English ministry, not just the youth ministry, everyone. So first, we need to find out who lives here, who lives in this community. All of us almost come from somewhere else. I come from Queens, some people come from Fishkill, some people come from Jersey, some people come from farther than that. So how are we going to do ministry to the people in this region if many of us aren't even around? So we need help from those who are in this region to help us find out who lives here. Who are we ministering to? Okay? Then we have to find ways to make our church relevant to them. Find ways to make it inviting for them. One difficult step I have seen so far is that English is very sparsely used in our meetings and in our services and in our written materials. I'm having a difficult time figuring out what's going on here, and I'm the pastor. So if I feel like I can't participate in much of what happens, how can someone who just randomly wanders in here and doesn't speak Korean ever feel like they could be a part of our church? Another thing, this is a side note, it's not in the slides, we got to put some more signs out front, because no matter which way you're driving from, you can't see that big brick sign at all. And it doesn't say what time services start, what language they're in. It doesn't say anything other than Mid-Hudson Korean United Methodist Church. It's beautiful, but we gotta maybe put a couple more signs out closer to the street, give people a little more information. Just a side note. For the young people in the audience and at home watching on Facebook in your pajamas, anyone who's 40 or younger or feels young, fine with me, God is speaking to you in ways that God did not speak to your parents. We need to hear what God is saying to you. We need to hear your voices, your ideas. That goes for you too, kids. The thoughts and ideas you have are there for a reason. And yeah, they're going to change. All the adults in here have had ideas about God that have changed. Perfectly normal. But God's speaking to you now, and the things that he's saying to you are for all of us. So we need to hear them. And the elders need to be attentive to listening to them. Church, do not fear the future. It may look nothing like what you expect. Nothing like what you envisioned 43 years ago when you started this church. But God is acting out God's plans for this church, for the global church, for our community, and for the world. Just as God did in Jeremiah, God's purposes for the next generation may be different than God's purposes were for you. But have no doubt, God's plan is being carried out. It has never changed. It has never been thwarted. God's plan for God's people will happen. We are one small stage in God's plan. One small tool. But let's be strategic about it. Let's be loving. Let's be welcoming and open to hear how God is relating to the people in our community, in our families, no matter how different their ideas may be from what we think God is supposed to be and God is supposed to say. Let's be open to listen. There will be a time for iron to sharpen iron, for our perspectives to be shaped and molded by one another. But now is the time to learn about our community, to listen to our young people, to be strategic, to be focused, and to have confidence that God's plan will happen here, in our church and in our lives together. Do not fear. God's plan will happen here. Let us pray. Lord, we are so blessed to be in your presence.